Hola y bienvenidos. Welcome to this episode of We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. My young adult children and I all moved from Texas to different countries in Europe over the past few years, and my hope now is to help other Americans who want to move to Europe to plan and execute their research effectively so you can find the right fit without stressing out, wasting money, or losing time. Hey, today we're talking with Christie DuChateau. She is an American-born Dutch citizen and tax expert who specializes in tax issues for other Americans living overseas. She is the founder and CEO of BNC Tax Accounting, which serves clients in 30 countries. And today she's graciously sharing her time to give us an overview of what Americans need to know about their taxes before they move to the Netherlands. So Christie, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Casey. My pleasure. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a quick disclaimer, right, that we're not offering tax guidance here. You should always consult directly with a tax professional if you have questions about your own financial situation. The goal here is to just kind of explain, I guess, the landscape. So do you want to talk about your background, like how you got into taxes when you moved to the Netherlands and why you started BNC?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So while I am the founder of BNC in Europe, we actually have been a family-owned firm around since 2002 that was started by my mom in San Francisco. And originally, she was a sort of a fractional CFO for a lot of companies in Silicon Valley and their advisors. But long story short, eventually in 2009, she moved to Mexico to retire. And when she got there, she found out there were a ton of expats living down there who were actually flying back to the States to file their taxes. She found that completely ridiculous and decided to continue her career as an expat tax advisor. About the same time, I was graduating university with an accounting degree, and I wasn't really sure which path I would take. I worked for a while as a controller of a home remodeling company in San Diego. But after some time, this expat tax thing really kind of got its teeth sunk into me as well. I always dreamed of living abroad. I always kind of hoped that someday I would. And so my mom asked me to move down to Mexico with her and explore the expat tax advisory world. So I got involved in the business there, began learning so much about the various different things that expats experience while filing their U.S. taxes. And then lo and behold, I did find a way to move abroad outside of just my family home in Mexico. I met my Dutch husband in 2014. And we moved to the Netherlands in 2015. So I've been here for 10 years.
So you had talked before about some of the myths that you encounter as a tax professional advising Americans. And I hear them too from people who are like, well, I would move to Europe, but then you have to pay taxes twice. And salaries are too low and taxes are too high. So do you want to talk a little bit about what the reality is like?
Yeah. So there's a bit of confusion on that, I would say. So while salaries across Europe are generally lower, the taxes that you pay are pretty dependent on which country you are a tax resident in. And as Americans, we have this fun little savings clause where no matter where you live in the world, you are taxed on your income, your worldwide income. So it is true that you're actually taxed twice. You are taxed in the country where you're a tax resident, but you're also taxed in the U.S. on that same income. There's a few different mechanisms that can be used to mitigate those taxes. So in a practical sense, most people end up paying the taxes where they're a resident, and then they take tax credits for the taxes that they've paid in their home country in the U.S. So usually it's a case where as long as the tax rates are at least as high as what it would have been in the US, the people are going to be paying the taxes in their home country, and generally across Europe, that's true.
So talk a little bit about like the salary to tax discrepancy, because that's one I think a lot of Americans, if they're still working age, maybe they've been offered a transfer with a global employer, or they're one of those rare birds that actually gets a job offer in the EU, and they look at the salary and they panic because it's so much lower than comparable salaries in the US. And they think that maybe that plus higher tax rates or what they expect to be higher tax rates are going to make it a non-workable option.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like I said, the salaries can be lower. So let's take a very concrete example. In my profession, a tax professional, somebody working in California as a senior level tax advisor might make upwards of $150,000 a year. If you look at a similar position here in the Netherlands, your salary range is going to be somewhere between 60 and 80,000 euros. So it would seem on its face a pretty significant pay cut to move from California to the Netherlands and drop your salary by half. Now, the tax rates on that salary are, in the Netherlands at least, let's take that as an example because I'm most familiar with that particular tax rate. It's a progressive tax rate, just like it is in the United States. So your wages are taxed on a progressive level. And that progressive level goes very, very quickly up to 49.5% in the Netherlands. So your first 75,000 of salary, if you just look at how the tax brackets are parsed out, it could seem like you might pay up to 49.5%. I've never seen anyone pay 49.5%. Just like the US has a standard deduction, which reduces how much of your income actually gets taxed, the Netherlands and all other European countries have mechanisms for that as well. So if you make under, let's say, 75,000 a year, which in Europe is pretty normal, there's a lot of credits and there's a lot of things that are tacked on to really reduce the tax rate. So in a practical sense, the tax rate becomes around 30, maybe 35% for most average and median salaries across Europe. But a lot of that is broken into what goes into social services. And so you have to look at the net take-home pay as a holistic view because there's a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that are more nuanced and included in the taxes in Europe. Think about things like healthcare, worker protections, paid family leave, these kinds of things.
Right, exactly. Those are things that I think part of the reason we feel like we have to earn high salaries in the US is because we have to pay for those things ourselves, like, $4,000 a month daycare or what have you.
Yeah.
So I think in our conversation before this, we had talked about maybe you could go over like the average and median tax rates and salaries. You talked just now a little bit about tax rates, but in general, for somebody who's like, say, mid-career in a profession, what can they expect to earn? Is the tax professional salary pretty indicative or is that on the high end?
No, so if you're getting a local contract job, those kinds of salaries could, it really ranges what kind of work you do. But I know, for example, software engineers, entry-level software engineers can make something like 40, 50,000 a year, where in the US, that would be laughable. And then something on the higher end, more experienced type software engineer might make 100, 120, 150,000. Again, it's about half of what you might make in the US. Now, these are numbers that I've seen in a practical sense. There are plenty of employers who are offering larger salaries, larger compensation packages, and there's also tax advantages for people who are moving from abroad to a country like the Netherlands.
Right. One thing that we didn't talk about before, but I'm curious about is if you have a retirement income from outside the Netherlands, like Social Security benefits or a pension or a 401k that's based in the US, is that taxed in the Netherlands when you receive it as like income?
Generally, under all the US and European tax treaties, the Social Security portion of your retirement income is taxable only in the US. So if you receive Social Security, that'll be taxable in the US. Retirement income from your 401k or traditional IRA, those are taxable in the country where you live and then subject to a tax credit in the US. So it could be more expensive to retire in a European country on that basis. But again, we are talking about the income tax rate versus what actually the costs of living are in that country.
Because that's another thing. I see a lot of people who are like, well, I want to retire there, but there's, there'll be a tax. And I'm thinking, well, there's going to be a tax anywhere. So
that's actually a really good point. And sorry, excuse the interruption, but that is a good point because if you really consider the taxes in the U.S., especially if you're in a high tax state like California or New York, once you look at federal taxes and state taxes combined, then you're pushing a lot of times that 35% mark, which is pretty indicative of European taxes as well. Europe has a wide range of Social Security taxes. In some countries, the Social Security portion is a lot higher than it is in the US. And in some cases in the US, it's significantly higher. In the Netherlands, the Social Security tax maxes out at around 10,000 euros per year. So after you've paid your first 10,000 euros Social Security tax, you're done paying Social Security. You don't pay anymore.
Nice. That's good to know. So what should Americans do to create a tax strategy before they move?
Especially in a case where you're looking at employment, and if you're considering leaving an employment position in the US with relatively high pay and looking to move to Europe for an employment position with somewhat lower pay, it's a good idea to take a look at the after-tax take-home pay, not just using ChatGPT or using some kind of online calculator, but you can reach out to a local tax advisor in the country where you're interested in relocating and find out what your actual paycheck is going to look like. Because you do want to consider those credits that come back to you, similar to US standard deduction, that may actually reduce the effective tax rate that you're going to pay. And then you're comparing a little bit more. What does my real take-home pay look like? That's the starting point. Then you can start to look at what do my out-of-pocket expenses look like.
Yeah. So it's best to get personalized advice rather than winging it or just taking something that you saw online as gospel, which I see a lot of people do. And then they're surprised when it turns out to be a little different, but every case is individual. And so it's important to have that guidance. In the community, there were a couple of people who asked specifically about how you pay your U.S. taxes when you live abroad, and why do you even need to file a return each year? I mean, obviously flying back from Mexico to file your U.S. taxes, not a model that we want to follow. So what's the process like?
Yeah. So if you have a pretty straightforward situation, you can use online do-it-yourself software. There's actually really good software that's starting to exist now for expats. The only thing is that when you first move abroad, your taxes are going to look really differently than they normally do in the US. There's a lot of new forms you have to deal with. So you're going to be reporting things like your foreign earned income exclusion. That'll be new if you've never lived abroad. Foreign tax credits and understanding which pieces of your foreign tax return you can actually take from. That's new. So a lot of times, especially in the first year abroad, I would say file with a professional. Of course, I am a professional, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think that it's a good idea if you've never done it before. And then from there, you can see whether it's something you want to invest your time in. Logistically, you either do it online, do-it-yourself software, or if you work with a tax professional, then they use professional software and can file directly with the federal and state agencies.
Okay, perfect. So so there's no need to actually go anywhere and, physically present your taxes, which,
No, I mean, and you shouldn't need to mail anything either. There are certain cases where you do, but most professional and online softwares will allow you to e-file.
Perfect. And the tax forms can look very different. The timing can be different as well. One of the things that I ran into is, tax season in the US, obviously, the big finale, unless you have an extension, is mid-April. But in Portugal, it's later in the year. You don't find out if you owe anything until the end of August.
Yeah.
And so how do you recommend that people time that if they are trying to balance which country to get a credit in? Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah, so timing wise, you'll pretty much always need to do your foreign taxes before your US taxes. And across Europe, a lot of those deadlines, like you mentioned, are later. And so you're going to want to have an extension filed by April 15th. Technically, taxpayers abroad have until June 15th to file their return, and you can even file an extension until June 15th. The issue with that is your taxes are due April 15th. So if you don't know how much tax you need to pay, you need to do your best estimate. And that can be done with professional tax services, or you can attempt to do it yourself. But either way, making a payment by April 15th is still necessary, even if you have the automatic 2-month extension to June 15th. And then if you need more time, then you can file an additional extension that gives you till October 15th.
Okay, great. For working age adults who want to save for retirement, once you're earning income in Europe, what are the pathways for building that retirement income? Because I think they're different from the U.S.
Well, this is a great topic, and I just did a live event in Amsterdam with a huge audience of people who wanted to understand this exactly. In most European countries, there are 3 pillars of retirement. So one is the Social Security portion provided by the governments, generally required of all taxpayers to pay into. It's very congruous with our U.S. Social Security system. All taxpayers pay in, and everybody gets to take money out when they retire, as long as you meet certain stipulations. The second pillar is a employer-based pension system. Most European countries, if not all, I believe all, have an employer-based system. And in some countries, that's required if you're in some fields. And in some countries, it's required if your employer has a certain number of employees and that sort of thing. But basically, that's your pension that either your employer pays into, you pay into through your paychecks, or a combination of both. That's very much like our 401k system. And then the third pillar is a individual retirement option, where you can open your own pension account and put money in either pre-tax or post-tax. That's very much like our traditional IRA or Roth IRA system. So really, it's not that different from the US. It's just that you're building into different portfolios. And you have to be a little bit careful as an American, because there's going to be not just tax consequences when you put the money in and take it out, but also reporting consequences around which of these options you choose. And then outside of that, sorry, this answer is a little long, but it is a comprehensive topic.
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Outside of that, you can also invest in, any number of choices, like stocks. Generally, you need to stay within the U.S. stock market to avoid big tax traps. And I can go into more detail if you're curious.
Okay.
But yeah, so stocks you can still do. And you can invest in things like real estate in the U.S. or real estate abroad. A lot of people now are investing in startups, equity for either their own employer or other kind of angel investing. So there are all a bunch of different choices that you can do, but those 3 pillars that we have in the US are pretty similar to the pillars that exist in Europe.
Okay, that's interesting. And since you mentioned reporting requirements, that's honestly one of the things that has been, and I need to talk to my CPA here in Portugal about this, making a note to do that. But yeah, the reporting requirements, what I've read so far had scared me off a little bit of putting any money into investment vehicles here. So are there particular categories that are better for minimizing the U.S. reporting requirements?
Yeah, so the issue that Americans run across is we have different rules for tax residents of Europe. Tax residents of Europe are restricted from buying certain American products in the stock market, and then American citizens are restricted from buying certain products that are available in foreign markets. So you have to navigate in between those lines. And if you're with an investment advisory firm, they're going to keep your investments in between those lines. If you're not, and you're just trying to do your investment portfolio yourself, you can very easily get outside of those lines. So that's the part people have to be careful about. There's some parameters that can help you navigate that. So there's, for example, Interactive Brokers is an online brokerage company, which is compliant for U.S. citizens who are European residents. There are investment advisors that will keep you within the right bounds. And then the reporting is really similar to just the same U.S. reporting for U.S. tax purposes. If you sell stock, you might have a capital gain or a capital loss. And then for European standards, it depends on which country you're in, how they tax that income as well.
Are you interested in moving to Europe but don't know where to start? Or have you started trying to do research and are feeling overwhelmed? Our new membership space, the We Are Moving to Europe community, offers you a curated learning area where you can explore your potential pathways to moving in a strategic and methodical way, get support from other Americans who are planning their own moves, document your research, make progress at your own pace, and get expert insights along the way. As a member, you'll have access to monthly Moving to Europe classes on fresh topics with new resources and get the tools you need to track your progress. You'll also find reliable, up-to-date information organized so you can find what you need when you need it. You'll get practical, supportive, respectful guidance, useful feedback, and input on future courses and resources. You'll also get access to We're Moving to Europe podcast episodes a week before the general public. We can't tell you where you should move, but our community will offer you a process, resources, and support to help you make that decision for yourself and your family. Search for We're Moving to Europe at skool.com, that's SKOOL.com, or check the show notes of this episode for the link.
Okay, so again, something to work with a professional about, especially if you are brand new to that sort of thing or just want to make absolutely sure that you don't end up with really extensive reporting requirements.
Exactly.
Let's see. So for self-employed people and entrepreneurs, which is, there's visas that allow people to move to the Netherlands, Spain, Portugal as self-employed or freelance folks. Are there any recommendations that you have for people in terms of planning and professional support, like if they're moving their business, say, to the Netherlands on the DAFT visa?
Yeah. So just a quick note about what the DAFT visa is. It's the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty, and it allows you to set up a business in the Netherlands as an American with very, very little restrictions. And so that visa is available for entrepreneurs who want to have a pretty quick and easy access way to get into Europe. That's for the Netherlands specifically. My overall advice for people who are entrepreneurs and have already established businesses in the US is remember that the US treats businesses differently than most European countries treat them. So let's say you have an LLC. It's a really common example. A lot of people in the US have an LLC and they want to move to Europe. If you keep your US LLC and you move to a European country and your US LLC is a sole proprietor entity, it's just you do some consulting. If that LLC moves to Europe with you, which it does because you're the one doing the business, your LLC is not a sole proprietorship anymore. It's a foreign corporation in the eyes of the European countries. And I can't stress that enough because a lot of people make this mistake. So they keep their LLC registered in the US, they move to Portugal or they move to the Netherlands or Spain, but the country where you've moved to looks at that US LLC and says, well, this is actually a corporate entity and it now does business in my country. So now you have a corporate entity in the country where you've moved to. It pays corporate income tax. On the US side, it doesn't. You pay personal income tax on that income. So now you have what's called a hybrid entity for US for in the tax world. So it has different tax treatment in the home country than it does in the resident country. This is a big problem. So absolutely, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a company already established, you really have to plan ahead and decide, is this company going to be a US company? And how do I make it stick as a US company and stay as a resident of US when I move abroad? Or is this company coming abroad with me because I do the services? And then I need to consider how it's going to be treated in my country of residence.
So all that needs to take place before you move.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of structuring that can be done ahead of time. And there can be some great tax advantages as well of doing that. If you've got an LLC and you have a lot of equity in that company, you might be able to import that equity to the country where you live and get tax advantages for many years down the road. So there are smart strategies around structuring.
Nice. I think that was there was one other question that somebody had asked about the differences between like a sole proprietorship and a BV structure for Americans who want to bring a business over.
Yeah, so this is a very specific question to the Netherlands. There's two different types going on that, on that journey of what is my entity. In the Netherlands, a ZZP is a self-employment entity, which is a sole proprietorship, and a BV is a corporate structure. And there's very specific tax benefits to doing one versus the other. And people are always trying to find out, well, what's the exact number of profit I need to make if I want to be a BV or a ZZP? There's more to it than just the taxes, though. There's when you're going down the daft route, and maybe we can have another conversation about this someday. When you go down that route, there's a host of other benefits tied to the type of entity structure you choose between the BV and the ZZP. So there is a sort of a tipping point that might make sense tax-wise, but there's other things to consider as well, like do you need liability protection? Are there going to be other shareholders involved in your company, or may you sometime want to have other shareholders join? Might you sell the company at some point in time? And who are the type of entities that you want to do business with? Is it going to be U.S. entities so anyway, there's a host of questions that can help you figure out whether a ZZP or BV it's better. That's not just based on the corporate or personal income taxes.
Okay, good to know. Let me see. I think the other question that I had for you was, how far in advance should Americans start planning this stuff? Like if they're looking at a timeline where I have people in my community who are like laying the groundwork for when they retire in 5 or 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I have people who are like, I would like to have left yesterday. So like practically speaking, how long does it take to kind of get your ducks in a row?
Yeah, I would say at least 6 months. Of course, you could do it in less. I moved in less than that, but I had, a handful of backpacks and not a lot of assets at the time when I was 25. So if you're pretty mobile, you can get a move on and move very quickly. But if you have a business already, or if you have housing is a big issue in a lot of European cities, definitely throughout the Netherlands. So you do need some time to get those pieces in place. It's not really a good idea to just like get on a plane and hop over without any idea of where you're going to live. Housing can be a big problem. I think 6 months minimum is a good timeline to start thinking about all the different pieces that have to fall into place, visa-wise, housing, structuring of your assets. You can do all of that in no less than 6 months.
Okay, that sounds good. And people, it's easy to compartmentalize that stuff and think visa, housing, business structure, that's all separate, but it's all really tightly interlocked in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. Portugal, especially, you probably know this, your visa status means way more than just entry to the country. It really dictates what types of income you're allowed to have and how each of those are taxable going forward, and a lot more about your living situation.
Yep, absolutely. So before we wrap up, and thank you, this has been super helpful, and I think it's going to answer questions for a lot of people about the tax thing, and maybe give some people a little more optimism and a clearer path, knowing that they're not going to, pay 49% of everything they earn to the Dutch government and then get taxed in the U.S. as well. Is there anything else that you would recommend that people know or do before they make a decision to move to Europe from the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that it really goes back to a couple different pieces. So you're looking for, usually the taxes are not the reason why people are moving to Europe. They're moving to Europe for either ease of access to travel. Right now, a lot of people are moving for safety. People are moving for family reunification or whatever. So you have a lot of different reasons why you might want to move. And the tax piece is an important thing to understand before you move. Make sure that you're going to have enough money to actually support your move. But in a lot of cases, what I see is that people end up spending less money once they're living in Europe because of all of the various cost of living pieces that are cheaper than in the US. That's not true across the board. It really depends on your lifestyle. I definitely have clients who come here and they decide that they really want to have a great apartment in the middle of the city center and they're going to spare no expense. And suddenly it turns out that actually their life here is more expensive, and their earning potential in the US was much higher. So there are some times where people go back because they figure that they need to earn as much as they can for as many years as they can, and they can't do that here in Europe. So I would say holistic view. That's my overview. A holistic view that's not just the taxes, but also all of the other aspects as well.
That sounds great. And yeah, the lifestyle, I've found that without really trying to cut my expenses, and of course, Portugal, relatively speaking to the rest of Europe, is pretty inexpensive in terms of cost of living, but I haven't had to make much effort to control my expenses. I'm not out here doing anything wild. It's just that most things from an American perspective are less costly.
Yeah.
So
it's true. And there's a bit of culture in that as well. I think in a lot of European countries, I know for sure in the Netherlands, it's almost unheard of to have credit cards and credit card debt. So trying to get a credit card in the Netherlands is like, well, we'll give you a credit line of 2,000 euros and it is automatically drawn from your bank account every month.
Yeah.
That's the most you can get. So, people aren't really inclined to be leasing a brand new car every 3 years or some of those little bits and pieces of keeping up with the Joneses that you're used to in the US. And, nothing wrong with that. The US has a lot of really interesting ways to spend money, but it's different in Europe.
It definitely is. And if you can embrace it, it can be really beneficial.
Yeah.
So, well, Christie DuChateau, thank you again for joining us. And we will put your contact information in the show notes.
Yeah. Christie
DuChateau from BNC Tax Professionals in the Netherlands. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure being here. Bye-bye.
That's all for now. Thank you for listening to We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. Our producer and editor is Magdalena Lass, and our music was composed by Sage Barton. For more resources and to join the conversation, connect with us on Substack at We're Moving to Europe.